So to start out this story, I was best friends with a girl named Charlie for 3 years. I loved her, and I thought she loved me, but that wasn't true. Back in 5th grade, I had just been transferred to a new school. The whole class knew each other from the year before, and I was a complete outcast. I met Charlie at the school's open house, and apparently, we sat at the same table. She was really nice and bubbly, and she said she'd like to get to know me. I wanted a friend, and she was there. Sparing the details of awkward preteens trying to get through school, we became fast friends. We got each other's Skype and we talked day and night. We called nearly every day and would just talk to hours. She made me laugh and we could talk about anything. And I also became friends with Charlie's friends Catherine and Addison, and we were a group of kids and had fun. But things changed subtly over time. Charlie became more depressed, mentioning that she'd been diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorders. I did my best to comfort her. What are friends for, right? And I assured her a diagnosis didn't change anything, and that it's a good thing that she's getting help for the issues. She agreed, but I don't think she really believed it. I'm not entirely sure when it started, but Charlie started venting to me about her emotions. I always listened and tried to help when I could find the words. I was her shoulder to cry on, and I was happy that I could help her in some way. It felt like repaying her for picking up the new nobody who wandered into her friend group. She never got better, though. She started to get more extreme and more serious breakdowns. She would call herself worthless, claiming that she could tell her parents hated her. I'd met her parents by that point, and they were loving people. They clearly cared about her, and I told her so. She called me a liar, saying that I should leave her to self-destruct and I should stop pretending that I care. I was heartbroken, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The next day at school, she seemed to be doing better, smiling and joking with our friends, and I tried to ask her about the night before, but she got a very serious look on her face and sounded angry, telling me that it doesn't matter anymore. I didn't pry, figuring she would talk about it later. That night, I asked her again, but I got a similar answer from before. I was confused, but I just went with it, and I wish that I hadn't. It went for months like that, her breaking down, spiraling, calling me a liar, a cheat, and saying that I hated her guts. Every attempt to comfort her or deny the accusations were met with, "You liar!" It became a routine. Charlie broke the routine by adding something new. She started to openly hurt herself in school. When she messed up, answered a question wrong, or sometimes for no reason, she'd take a mechanical pencil and start scratching her arm, holding it just to show me and her friends exactly what she was doing. Whenever we tried to stop her, she'd snap at us, saying to stop pretending that we care and to "shut up" or "don't touch me." We didn't know what to do, and we were just kids. The summer after 5th grade went pretty well. She seemed to be getting a bit better, with less spiraling and breakdowns, and we talked every day, and before we knew it, summer was over. 6th grade, middle school. We were a year older and in a new school. We were still in a group, me, Charlie, Catherine, and Addison. This is when Charlie got worse again. She started having breakdowns during school and openly self-harming more. I was constantly worried for her. I don't think there was a full day that whole year that I could relax and not worry about her hurting herself. If memory serves, It was the first year she messaged me saying that she wanted to kill herself. She explained how she would do it and how easy it would be, and how no one would care when she was gone. I was crying, hysterically trying to calm her down and saying how much I cared about her and how I didn't know what I'd do without her. She ended a conversation saying that she wouldn't do it. I was beyond relieved and made sure to check up with her the next day at school. She insisted that it wasn't that bad and that I had overreacted. I still insisted she be honest about those feelings and tell an adult if she was really thinking about suicide, and Charlie promised that she would. The rest of the year remained pretty consistent, with a steady incline in severity of her breakdowns, but slow enough that I hardly noticed the change. 7th grade middle school. This was the year shit really hit the fan. This year is very fuzzy in my memory, so I'll have to just hit the main points. Charlie was starting to struggle in school. When she was immediately great at something, she gave up. She just stopped trying. The open self-harm got worse, going as far as to shout at me if I tried to stop her. But she was still my best friend, and I loved her, and she loved me, right? We could talk to each other about anything, except when I tried to vent to her, she'd say that I was making it all about me, or that she couldn't handle it right then. If she was having trouble, and I tried to relate to her issues and give advice, she'd say that I was making it about myself and that I'm not her parent. This year, I started to really question my gender. I met my actual best friend and my now platonic partner, Liz. We were two broken trans kids, so deep in the closet that we couldn't admit that we were trans. Liz was the first to come out, and I welcomed her with open arms, gushing about how much stuff we could do together. Charlie didn't like Liz. She was clearly jealous and thought Liz was taking me from her. I reassured her that I still cared about her and that she was still my number one, but she didn't believe me. About the middle of the school year, Charlie said that she might have a crush on me, and she asked if I would be opposed to being her romantic partner. At that time, I was very in denial about my sexuality, and I said that I wouldn't mind it. She seemed to take this as me consenting to some kind of relationship. She became more touchy, hugging me and even kissed my head or forehead a few times. I didn't know why at that time, but these actions made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I wanted to shrivel up and hide. I now know it's because I'm touch-averse, but at that time, I hated myself for these reactions. I beat myself up inside for recoiling from my best friend, and how dare I get grossed out. I very quickly fessed up to the discomfort, telling her that I didn't actually want to date her, and that we weren't together, and that I wasn't comfortable with the amount of physical contact she was giving. She seemed understanding, apologizing for being touchy, and even joking a bit about being touch-starved. After that, she started to get really distant when we were in person, and not just physical distance. She seemed to avoid talking to me for long and made any excuse to shut me up. The nightly routine of breakdown Russian roulette, or whether it be a couple sentences or 4 hours, continued. Warning. This section forward talks about suicide threats, so please listen with care. There were a few different times she threatened suicide. More than once, she'd say it would be my fault, and one particularly standout night, she sent me a video. There was Charlie, sitting in her bathroom next to the toilet. This is a paraphrase of what she said. It would be easy for me to just end it. I could drown myself in the toilet and no one would know. It would be quiet and no one would care. My parents don't give a shit. I texted her over and over again, begging for her not to do anything, saying that I loved her and her parents loved her and that I would miss her. I cried so much that I got dehydrated, and I stayed up past midnight just waiting for her to respond. But she didn't, and I thought she was dead. I thought she had killed herself and it was my fault, and that I should have gotten to her sooner. I cried myself to sleep that night. When I got to school, I saw her walking into class and my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I ran up and hugged her, and I wept and begged her for an answer, asking where she had been, saying that I thought she died. She chuckled. Geez, I'm sorry. I forgot to check my phone last night. It felt like everything stopped. I just stared at her. This person who I'd loved for years now, who I looked after, talked to, cared for, and couldn't live without, just laughed about it? I didn't know what to say. I was so dumbfounded that I just tried to act normal. And my whole view of her shattered that day, and it was the beginning of the end. That year droned on, and I slowly started to push away from Charlie. I still cared deeply for her, but I couldn't take it anymore. Her breakdowns and her ramblings and venting was daily, and I just couldn't handle her berating me. I felt terrible, like I was abandoning her, and it felt like leaving a person with a broken foot to walk 1,000 stairs themselves. But I had to get away. I started talking to our mutual friends about what she did and was doing, and they said that it was terrible and couldn't believe she would say such things. I showed them the conversations, feeling even more guilty for showing off our private texts to other people. But I had to prove it though, and I had to make them believe me. In the end, I did get away from Charlie. I think my other friends did too, but they didn't do much for me. They shut me out, and while I was broken, healing from a 3-year-long wound, they talked about me behind my back, added fuel to my fire, only to tell me that I only ever talked about Charlie. I lost pretty much all of my friends that year, and I tried to resettle back into my group of friends at first. But it wasn't the same as before. I was constantly worried that they were talking about me behind my back, and I was terrified that they saw me to be on the same level as Charlie. So I left that group. It was for the best in the end. It's been a few years now, and I can say with certainty that I have trauma from those years of abuse. And this post is by no means detailed enough to capture the horrific experience that was my time as Charlie's friend. But I don't want to reopen old wounds. I am still great friends with Liz, and she has honestly saved me from Charlie's reign of terror. Her kindness and friendship, contrasted with Charlie's everything, woke me up to how awful it was. I don't hate Charlie, despite all of the things that she did to me. She was a terrible person and an absolute monster of a human. But we were just kids. I know that I'm not the same person that I was back then, and I figure that she isn't either. Everyone deserves a second chance in life. But Charlie, let's never meet again. Additional information. I wanted to add some clarity and specify some of Charlie's actions. I tried to paint broad strokes, but it seems that some things need to be clarified. So, let's begin. Charlie was on antidepressants starting in the summer post 5th grade. She often blamed her outburst on her unfit medication or stating, "Oh, I forgot to take my meds." I later found out that she had been lying. Her parents ensured that she took her medication at the right time each night, and her forgetting it was a complete lie used to excuse her actions. Later in the timeline of abuse, 7th grade, she would say things like, "Don't even try, she'll be back soon," referring to herself during a mental spiral or breakdown as a different person. This is also when she started to claim to not remember doing the things she did during breakdowns. I know for a fact that she was lying about this because in private, she would admit to remembering and say how she's not really two different people. Every time it was just used as excuses for her to be a horrible person. More often than not, she told me it would be my fault if she killed herself. If I left her, whatever she did to herself afterwards would be my fault. And if I stopped being her friend, it would prove her right. So I stayed. Those few nights that she stopped talking abruptly, I was horrified that she died and it would be all my fault. I thought her parents would get mad at me, screaming and crying at me for killing their daughter. But that day never came. I got out and I escaped her iron grip, and I have never been more thankful for having true friends who love me. I truly don't know where I'd be now if I had stayed. During 8th grade, she was still in my school. We had the same math class each morning, and I did everything possible to ignore her. Sometimes, I would see her in the hall or at lunch, and I couldn't bring myself to look at her. At one point, we were outside on break and she was right next to me, but I couldn't look at her face. It felt like if I were to look, my eyes would burn like looking directly at the sun. It would be easy to hate her for everything she did to me and others, but hatred only breeds contempt. I do hope she has found a better life, but I dearly hope, for my sake, that we never meet again. I've been needing to express myself about what happened between October 2017 to February 2019. So, here's some backstory to try to answer some questions before they get asked. I graduated from school in 2016 and I wasn't working at this time. It wasn't like that I didn't try to find work. I did. I just didn't get many calls back. And I had a couple of job interviews, but they all fell flat. And it didn't help that I stupidly refused to put my resume forward to the local supermarkets because most of the high school bullies work at which, and the thought of working with a group of people who terrorized me for 4-ish years filled me with too much anxiety. So instead, I spent most of the time surrounded with a select few friends that I had, which in the end wasn't that many at all. I spent most of the time developing our relationship further, instead of finding friends, a mistake that I would come to regret when we split right before high school ended. I didn't really have many friends to fall back on, and I had only one really close friend all throughout high school that we will call Sam, as I don't want to use any real names. Sam was really supportive when me and my girlfriend broke up. He also had a great job and a really nice family, money, friends, and at that time was a pretty good influence on me, as my parents would say. He didn't do any drugs or drink, and I looked up to him as a person and as my best friend. So, it was a really easy decision when Sam asked me to move in with him when we found a cheap rental property. Sam's family were friends with a small real estate agent office so it was easy for Sam to find a house. Even if it was stupidly priced for the condition of the house, we were stupid and our parents just wanted us out. Sam's family believed that he was too successful for them to need to support, and my parents, or stepdad, wanted me out because he was tired of needing to support me. Again, I wasn't working. Sam and I moved out with his childhood friend, who we will call Blake. Now, before we moved, I had never met this person before, and he was never really home because he was always out for work or dirt bike riding. He lived with us for about 4 months before the first big terrible event happened. Sam let 2 strangers, from Blake's perspective, sleep in his bed when he was away from home. Blake got home one night at 2:30 a.m. ready for bed to walk into his room and to see 2 teenagers having sex in his bed. He left the next day, and as far as I know to this day, after their last argument, they never talked to each other again. So after that brief intro, this is where I will get into the bulk of this post, starting from February of 2018. At this point, I had a source of income. I had gotten a job through my dad, and I was enjoying being out of the house. And by this time, I was starting to suspect that something was wrong with Sam. He wasn't leaving to go to work before me, which was weird. He was increasingly snappy and angry all the time, and he was leaving work early all the time and didn't tell me where he was going. In the end, he was cheating on his girlfriend at that time with a girl from our high school. The first few months with my friend acting this way, he would threaten to move all my stuff out of the house and onto the road if I didn't do something he said, like cleaning up the house on my own, or going shopping, or any other various task. I didn't have much, only my mattress. He accidentally broke my bed frame while I was at work, and my office computer too, which I used for Discord and playing small indie games, so it wouldn't be hard for him to actually do it. He never did, but I guess it was because that I never really argued with him. He started stealing my clothes, which didn't even fit him, and he would let me borrow his shirts to brag about how good of a friend he was. Eventually, he just stopped cooking food for himself. Sam's dad had given him a fuel card to use for petrol. He used to buy fast food twice a day for months, until his dad cut him off from the card, in which he turned to 2-liter bottle of iced coffee and McDonald's nightly. I understand that this was more of his business and not mine, but he eventually asked me to cover his part of the rent, and he couldn't afford bills, which made it my issue. He asked me to buy him food, and when I refused, he would guilt-trip me into feeling like absolute shit, or he would block the entrance to the house or my doorway to my room. I was already really anxious since he had started getting more aggressive and angry, so I often agreed, which left me struggling with money. At some stage, he just stopped going to work, and as he explained it, work let me leave early today, and they said that they would call me in again if they needed me. We got into an argument and I told him that he was wrong, that he still had to go to work. It took him 10 weeks to call up his work, who explained to him they meant for that day, and that they had registered him as abandoning his job, so he ended up unemployed. I tried to support him as much as he had for me during my breakup and when I moved in when I was unemployed, but he got really mad and angry all the time, which he took out on me, screaming at me for being right. Because of all his free time, he started inviting the girl from high school over all the time, threatening me to keep it as a secret from his girlfriend. Obviously, in the end, I didn't, since I was close with Sam's current girlfriend. I was actively trying to stay out of the house, so I only ever saw this girl over 2 or 3 times. But in reality, she was over all the time when I was at work, about 4 times a day. For the more tragic part of when I was living with him, he decided to buy some pets. He was given a bird from his family. He brought a dog, which he called Sparta, and he decided to buy a cat, which he called Skittles, for the girl from high school, which unfortunately ran away. He then brought another cat and called it Skittles again. And the state that this kitten was left in was appalling when either the girl or I wasn't around the house. It was revealed that he would lock the kitten in a closet and only feed her when he remembered. I should have tried harder to protect the animals in the house, and I tried my best to feed them when Sam wasn't around. But when he caught food missing, he would question me. When he found me feeding his cat, he grabbed me, slammed me into the wall, and screamed at me for poisoning his animals. And I remembered he hit me, like really hard. One day, I came home, and the bird that he kept near the door wasn't there, and Sam wasn't home. I asked him where the bird was, and apparently it had fallen over in its cage and broke its neck. This was where immediate panic started, and I realized that I was living with someone who was much more than depressed. Sam came home later, and I was ready to explode at him as I was fueled with rage and anger for what he has done to the bird. And with an empty shoebox, he proceeded to go to our backyard. I followed him, and it turns out that he had the box to bury the kitten, who, according to Sam, broke its neck jumping around the closet. I remember the way he told me vividly. He wasn't sad or angry. He was empty. His eyes felt hollow, and he told me that he wasn't sad about it. And he went back inside to his room and locked himself in there, and I didn't see him for nearly a week. I came home one day from a very tiring day from work, and I had requested to get the morning off to clean for a house inspection. At this point, I believe that this was our second one, so I stayed behind at work to do some overtime. Sam thought that I was out for the night, and when I got home around 8:30, I found him and the girl from high school smoking weed in our lounge room. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. And at this point, Sam wasn't the person that I went to high school with. Every day for over the past 6 months, he had found a way to yell, steal, guilt, punch and kick, and threaten me nearly every day. There was always a reason he ate at me, blamed me for what happened to the bird or cat because I wasn't there to stop them from hurting themselves. This was one of the final turning points for me. I went to bed and had a sleepless night, and I heard Sam insult me and heard him cheat on his girlfriend. I heard him lie about money, being employed, and using everything he remembered from high school to impress her. The next day, I told his girlfriend, and I stole his dog who was incredibly malnourished, even after that I had been sneakily feeding him a handful of dry food twice a day. And that dog was also beaten. I called the RSPCA and reported him for animal abuse, and I emailed photos that I took of the house for proof. I used the cover of the real estate agent coming over for an inspection to protect myself from him overreacting. When I came back to collect the last of my things, which was my old PC, I stupidly entered the house, thinking that our real estate agent was in there. I thought his car was there when it wasn't, and I was greeted in the hallway by a shirtless Sam who pushed me against the wall. He smelled of weed and alcohol. The smell of weed and alcohol was burning into my skin. He pushed me against the wall with one hand and showed me a knife in the other hand. He had pinned me against the wall with a knife in his hand. There was a long argument, which was him more screaming at me and me shaking and not being able to spit my words out. He got angry when I told him where Sparta was and ran the silver of the knife down my arm. I remember feeling like I blacked out and everything was a blur. He kept getting more and more intense, going on about how I betrayed him as a friend and his girlfriend dumped me over him. He let go of my neck and pushed me harder into the wall with his shoulder and drew the knife close to my neck. And I truly felt like I was going to die. And I muttered out, "My friends can hear you." We were close enough to my room, and he often knows that when I left my room, I always had Discord open. He let go of me, and I ran away to my car and left. I stayed with my parents for a couple of days living on their couch, too afraid to really talk to anyone, and my parents called me Jumpy, and I told them that I missed them because I hardly seen them over the past 10 or so months. Sam chucked me a message saying that we need to talk, which we did in a public place. He told me that he was moving out back to his parents because he could no longer support himself and that the house had too many bad memories for him. And he left. To this day, I still have not seen him. This was around August of 2018. People from high school stopped being his friends once the girl and I told all of our collective friends what he did and how he acted, and I reported him to the police. I never pressed charges, but I told them that I never wanted to see Sam again. I don't think anything ever came out of it, and I couldn't afford to get a restraining order, as I recall being told that they cost money, but it is reported. I moved back into my house on my own, and he left all of his furniture and bedding as it was, only taking his headphones, his PS4, and his TV. From that moment on, I was alone and living in the house that my best friend nearly killed me in. I was sleeping on his couch in the lounge room because I couldn't afford my own. I was alone, and I was in a really bad headspace, and I stopped talking to all my friends and at work, and I started having nightmares. So this was dating from October of 2017 to August of 2018. I was still in the house until early 2019, which, living in the aftermath of what Sam did to me, was bad, if not worse, than living without him. The isolation and darkness, and the things that I saw and regret not doing, like not being there to save the bird and the cat, still eat away at me. I will need to do some digging, but I will try to find images of this house and the dog for proof if needed. Things didn't get better, and then worse, until I met a girl. So, where am I now? At the end of 2019, I met my current partner. She's absolutely incredible, and we actually bought a house together last month. We currently live with my parents until we move in 2 weeks, and I think of all my negative feelings about my old house and Sam have resurfaced due to me moving again. In the end, I'm still cared and cautious, but getting this off my chest is a way that I am moving forward and putting my old house behind me. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.